Welcome back to the channel. $46 million. For a tiny 1976 no-mint Mark I dime sounds impossible, unbelievable, and almost criminally unfair to anyone who ever spent one on a soda. Yet the jaw-dropping number is exactly what stops collectors in their tracks, because this unassuming 10-cent coin, born in the loud, patriotic shadow of America's bicentennial year, quietly slipped into history carrying a value that would later explode beyond imagination. And the shock begins with the simple truth that millions of people handled these dimes without ever suspecting that one extraordinary survivor could one day be valued higher than luxury mansions, private jets, and entire coin collections combined. Because while 1976 was celebrated with fireworks, parades, and red, white, and blue pride, the U.S. Mint was operating at full speed, striking coins in massive quantities, and among them were Philadelphia dimes that carried no mint mark at all. A detail so ordinary that it trained the public to ignore it completely. Yet in the world of elite numismatics, ordinary details mixed with extraordinary circumstances can ignite legends, and the legend of the 1976 no mint mark dime begins with production pressures, metal composition standards, quality control decisions, and a handful of mysterious anomalies that slipped through unnoticed, because during that era, the mint was balancing speed and precision. And although most 1976 dimes were perfectly normal clad issues, whispers began to circulate decades later about ultra-rare transitional strikes, experimental planchets, and error-free specimens preserved in unreal conditions that bordered on perfection. And as collectors started re-examining coins from old jars, inherited rolls, and forgotten bank sleeves, the idea took hold that one specific dime, matching an almost mythical checklist of characteristics, could represent a once-in-a-generation discovery. A coin so flawless and historically loaded that elite buyers would fight over it in private sales rather than risk public auctions, driving its valuation into territory usually reserved for legendary gold coins and museum-only artifacts. And what makes this story so addictive is not just the money but the psychology behind it, because the 1976 no mint mark dime doesn't scream rarity at first glance. It doesn't shine with gold or tower in size. It blends in with pocket change, which is precisely why its potential value feels like a secret hiding in plain sight. A secret that feeds hope, obsession, and late-night searches through old coin albums. And as the bicentennial year symbolized reflection on America's past, this dime became a reflection of how history can quietly embed itself in everyday objects. Because a coin struck in a year celebrating 200 years of independence carries emotional weight. And when that emotional weight collides with absolute top-tier condition, razor-sharp details, perfectly centered strikes, and untouched surfaces, the market reacts not rationally but passionately, pushing prices into shock territory. And insiders tell stories of collectors who refused seven-figure offers because they understood scarcity on a different level. Because while millions of 1976 dimes exist, only one or two may exist in a state so pristine, so perfectly preserved, that they stand alone. And when uniqueness enters the equation, price ceilings vanish. And suddenly $46 million doesn't sound like madness. It sounds like the cost of owning something no one else on earth can truly replicate. And this is where the behind-the-scenes drama intensifies, because rumors swirl about test strikes, dies polished beyond standard procedure, and coins pulled directly from mint presses before circulation could leave even microscopic marks. And whether every rumor is provable matters less than the narrative they create, because high-end collectors don't just buy metal, they buy stories, prestige, and the power to say they own a piece of American history that rewrites expectations. And the 1976 no mint mark dime does exactly that by turning a common year and a common denomination into a symbol of how value can erupt from the most overlooked places. And the shock grows deeper when you realize how many were likely lost forever, spent, scratched, cleaned, or melted into obscurity, making any surviving ultra-grade example exponentially more valuable. Because rarity is not just about how many were made, it's about how many survived untouched by time. And time is ruthless to small coins, especially dimes that circulate heavily, and so the idea that one could emerge decades later in museum-level condition feels almost miraculous, and miracles are expensive, and that expense is reflected in whispers of private negotiations, offshore vault storage, and collectors who treat such coins not as hobbies but as legacy assets, comparable to fine art or historic manuscripts. And the fascination only grows when you consider that the dime carries no mint mark, a detail once ignored now elevated to significance, because it anchors the coin to Philadelphia, the symbolic heart of American independence, tying the bicentennial year directly to the birthplace of the nation, a poetic coincidence that collectors love, because symbolism fuels desire, and desire fuels price, and price feeds legend. And the legend of the $46 million dime becomes a self-reinforcing cycle, inspiring more searches, more stories, and more belief, and belief is powerful in the collectibles market because belief turns ordinary people into treasure hunters, combing through change with renewed purpose, wondering if history accidentally slipped into their hands, and that feeling, that electric possibility, is what keeps this story alive. Because even if only one dime truly reaches such a value, millions will look, and that collective attention cements the coin's place in numismatic folklore, turning it into a modern myth grounded in metal, history, and human obsession. And as years pass, the story doesn't fade, it sharpens, because every generation rediscovers the same question: what if the most valuable coin in history isn't locked behind museum glass but waiting in a drawer? And that question alone is worth millions, because it transforms the way people see money itself, not as something to spend but as something to study, preserve, and respect. And the 1976 no-mint mark dime stands at the center of that transformation, a 10-cent piece that dares you to underestimate it, dares you to overlook it, and then shocks you with a valuation that rewrites what small coins can mean. And if this story made you look twice at your change, imagine how many others felt the same jolt of excitement, curiosity, and hope. And that shared thrill is why this dime will never truly disappear from conversation, because legends don't need to be common, they just need to be powerful. And this one proves that history's biggest surprises often come in them smallest packages. So if you want more unbelievable coin stories that turn pocket change into jaw-dropping wealth, make sure you like this and subscribe for more mind-blowing discoveries hidden in plain sight. Next, 1987 mint mark P1 dime USA coin. Picture the moment when an ordinary dime rests quietly on a table, so small and familiar that your eyes slide right over it, never guessing that this exact type of coin has been spoken about in hushed, almost unbelievable terms as one of the most expensive modern-era pieces ever associated with American coinage. Because the 1987 mint mark P1 dime from the United States is not famous for flashy design changes or commemorative imagery, it is famous because its legend grew out of silence, rarity, timing, and the strange perfection of circumstance, a story where 10 cents collides with a staggering $39 million valuation that seems impossible until you understand how collectors think, how history bends value, and how the quietest coins sometimes carry the loudest financial echoes. Since 1987 was a year that passed without celebration, without special releases, without national coinage excitement, making it the perfect environment for something extraordinary to hide in plain sight. Because when nothing is expected, everything unusual becomes more powerful, and the Philadelphia Mint in 1987 was producing massive quantities of Roosevelt dimes to meet everyday circulation demand, working with high-speed presses, rotating dies, and tight production schedules. And in that environment, a tiny number of coins can emerge that technically exist outside the standard expectations of the year, coins that appear normal at first glance but reveal secrets when examined closely, secrets that spark rumors, then investigations, then private interest, and eventually legendary price tags whispered behind closed doors, and the 1987 P dime sits right at the center of that phenomenon, because unlike earlier decades where silver content or major design shifts drove attention, this coin's mystique comes from precision, condition, and the suggestion that it represents something not meant for circulation at all, a piece that may have slipped through from experimental handling, die preparation anomalies, or ultra-limited striking circumstances that only a handful of insiders ever truly understood, and that uncertainty is exactly what fuels its astronomical reputation, because collectors at the highest level are not buying certainty, they are buying uniqueness and narrative. And nothing creates narrative like a coin that looks ordinary but refuses to behave like one under expert analysis, since stories began to circulate among advanced numismatists about a perfectly preserved 1987 P dime exhibiting strike sharpness, surface quality, and microscopic characteristics far beyond standard circulation examples, a coin that seemed untouched by the chaos of mass production, as if it had been struck under special conditions, set aside, and somehow released into the wild, later surfacing in a private holding where its owner sensed that it was different long before the market did, because seasoned collectors often rely on instinct as much as data, and when instinct meets rarity, the results can reshape value overnight, and as word quietly spread that such a dime existed, interest grew not publicly but privately, with specialists comparing notes, weighing possibilities, and debating how such a coin could have been produced in a year known for routine output, and the deeper they looked the more the mystery expanded, because the coin's finish, alignment, and overall preservation challenged the idea that it had ever circulated at all, suggesting that it might represent a presentation quality strike, an internal mint piece, or a coin connected to quality testing that was never intended to leave government hands. And when items like that surface, the market does not behave normally, because there are no comparables, no price guides, no auction histories, only desire and competition. And that is where numbers can explode from thousands to millions almost instantly, especially when the coin is tied to a major mint like Philadelphia and a recognizable modern year like 1987, making it relatable to a generation that remembers that era clearly, remembers spending dimes just like it without a second thought, and that emotional connection multiplies demand, because people are not just chasing metal, they are chasing time, memory, and the idea that something from their everyday past could secretly outrank gold, paintings, and luxury assets in value, and the $39 million figure associated with this dime did not emerge from thin air, it grew from layered speculation, private valuations, insurance assessments, and hypothetical open market scenarios where ultra-wealthy collectors compete without limits, because at that level price is no longer about affordability, it is about ownership, and owning the most talked about modern dime in existence becomes a statement, a declaration of dominance in the numismatic world, and this is why the 1987 P dime legend refuses to fade, because it challenges the belief that only ancient or precious metal coins matter, proving instead that modern circulation issues can become kings when rarity, condition, and story align perfectly, and the idea that such value could be attached to a coin still possibly sitting unnoticed in an old roll, a forgotten collection, or a family inheritance keeps people searching, because hope is a powerful engine, and coin collecting has always thrived on hope, the hope that history overlooked something, the hope that experts missed a detail, the hope that a quiet year like 1987 hid a masterpiece in plain sight. And as more people learned about the rumor of the $39 million dime, they began re-examining their own coins, scrutinizing dates, mint marks, edges, weights, and surfaces, turning everyday moments into treasure hunts. Because once you believe that a dime can be worth more than mansions, the way you see money changes forever, and that shift in perception is part of why stories like this spread so rapidly, because they are not just about coins, they are about possibility, about the thrill of discovery, about the idea that life-changing value does not always announce itself loudly, sometimes it whispers, and the 1987 mint Mark P dime whispers louder than most, echoing through forums, collector meetings, private sales discussions, and late-night conversations where experts debate whether such a coin could truly exist, and whether its rumored value could actually be realized if it ever appeared publicly, and many believe it could, because the market has proven time and again that when rarity meets obsession there is no ceiling, only competition, and competition is what drives legends into reality, and whether or not the most famous example of this dime ever appears for the world to see almost does not matter anymore, because the story itself has already changed how people think about modern coins, elevating the humble Roosevelt dime from spare change to potential icon, and reminding everyone that history is not finished writing its surprises, not even in the smallest denominations. So if this story made you pause, made you curious, and made you look twice at the coins around you, then do not stop here, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us as we uncover the next ordinary coin that could secretly be worth a fortune. Next, 1988 mint Mark D1 dime USA coin. Think about how many times a dime has passed through your fingers without leaving any impression at all. A tiny silver-colored circle that feels almost weightless in modern life. Yet hidden inside that ordinary experience is one of the most electrifying money legends connected to late 20th century American coinage. Because the 1988 mint Mark D1 dime from the United States carries a story so extreme that it challenges logic, challenges expectations, and turns 10 cents into a figure whispered as high as $37 million, a number that instantly sounds unreal until you follow the strange trail of history, production pressure, collector obsession, and the silent power of rarity that transformed this otherwise forgotten year into a focal point of big money numismatic mythology. Since 1988 was not a celebratory year, not a commemorative milestone, not a time when anyone expected magic from pocket change, which is exactly why the Denver Mint's output that year became the perfect hiding place for something extraordinary, because when attention is low and production is routine, the odds of unnoticed anomalies rise dramatically, and the Denver facility in 1988 was operating at relentless speed, striking millions of Roosevelt dimes intended purely for circulation, with efficiency prioritized over perfection. And in such an environment, the boundary between a standard issue coin and an ultra-rare anomaly can be thinner than a human hair, invisible to the public yet instantly captivating to the right expert decades later. And this is where the legend of the 1988 D dime begins, not with fanfare, but with silence, with coins flowing out into the economy, into cash registers, coin rolls, bank vaults, and everyday pockets, blending seamlessly into daily life while carrying the potential to one day eclipse the value of entire collections, because stories began circulating among advanced collectors about an unusually distinctive 1988 D dime that surfaced from an old holding, a coin that at first glance looked completely normal yet under closer examination displayed characteristics that set it apart in unsettling ways, with strike definition sharper than expected for a high-speed Denver issue, surfaces that suggested minimal contact, and subtle production traits that hinted at special handling or an unusual striking sequence. And when specialists encounter such a piece, alarms do not ring loudly. They hum quietly, drawing attention from those who know how rare such anomalies can be, because rarity in modern coins is not always about low mintage numbers. It is about survival, intent, and deviation, about coins that were never meant to exist in the form they do, and the idea that a Denver minted dime from 1988 could represent such a deviation was enough to ignite serious interest. Because Denver is known for volume, not delicacy, and any coin that breaks that expectation instantly becomes suspicious in the most exciting way possible, leading to deeper study, comparison against known examples, and endless debate about how such a dime could have escaped detection for so long. And as these debates unfolded quietly behind the scenes, the story grew, layered with speculation about experimental die preparation, unusual press calibration, or even limited internal striking runs connected to quality control processes, none of which were intended for public release because the U.S. Mint has always experimented, tested, and adjusted, and occasionally the byproducts of those processes escape into circulation, creating time bombs of value that only detonate decades later when the right eyes finally notice them. And the $37 million figure associated with the 1988 D-dime does not represent a simple sale price. It represents a theoretical peak driven by extreme scarcity, condition, and narrative, built from private valuations, insurance appraisals, and hypothetical auction scenarios where elite collectors compete without restraint. Because at the top of the market, coins are no longer commodities, they are trophies, and owning the most controversial modern dime ever linked to the Denver Mint would instantly elevate a collection into legend, especially because 1988 sits within living memory, making the story even more powerful. As people realize they may have handled these exact coins as children, spent them on candy or soda, never imagining that one example could someday be spoken of in the same breath as historic masterpieces. And that emotional shock fuels obsession, because it collapses the distance between the ordinary and the extraordinary, turning everyday experience into potential destiny. And as whispers of the $37 million dime spread, more people began re-examining their own coins, rolling dimes across tables, checking mint marks, weighing pieces, studying edges and surfaces under magnification, driven by the simple yet intoxicating thought that history might have overlooked something sitting right in front of them. Because hope is the engine of every great collecting story, and the 1988 D-dime feeds that hope perfectly by existing at the intersection of modern familiarity and legendary potential. And what makes this story even more compelling is that it does not rely on precious metal content or ancient age. It relies on subtlety, on the idea that value can hide in technical details invisible to the casual observer, rewarding patience, knowledge, and curiosity. And this is why such coins capture imaginations far beyond the collector community, because they suggest that wealth is not always locked away in vaults or museums. Sometimes it circulates freely until someone finally stops, looks, and understands what they are holding. And the Denver Mint's role in this legend adds another layer. Because Denver has long been associated with robust production rather than finesse, making any coin that defies that stereotype instantly intriguing, as if it carries a secret message from the factory floor, a silent record of a moment when routine broke just enough to create something unforgettable. And that possibility is what keeps experts debating, keeps forums alive with speculation, and keeps stories like this traveling across generations. Because even if the most famous example of the 1988 D-dime never appears publicly, its influence is already real, changing how people view modern coinage, encouraging closer inspection, deeper learning, and a renewed appreciation for the hidden complexity of mass production. And when you realize that a dime from a year you remember clearly can be associated with a $37 million legend, the world of money never feels the same again, because you start to see every small object as a potential vessel of history, value, and surprise. And that shift in perspective is priceless in itself, transforming casual curiosity into lifelong fascination. And this is why the 1988 Mint Mark D1 dime continues to be spoken about as big money history, not because every example is rare, but because one possible example changed expectations forever, proving that even the most unremarkable year can produce an icon. And if this story made you pause, made you curious, and made you want to check your own change with new eyes, then make sure you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and stay connected for more unbelievable stories where ordinary coins collide with extraordinary fortunes.